And who was the chief gods of Greece? Zeus. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitude. You realize all them people standing there to listen to Paul and Barnabas thought that they were Zeus and Hermes. And they fixing to go do all these sacrifices to these Greek gods. Verse 14, but when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these vain things to the living El Elohim, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. Even though he's preaching, they still wanted to sacrifice to their gods. You see, people love rituals. They love the rituals because it makes it feel like, well, if I've done something, then I have entered into my part of my salvation. There ain't nothing you can do to earn your salvation. You can't walk in Torah to earn your salvation. All you can do is accept what Messiah Yahushua has done for you. And because he has given you that deliverance, then you walk in obedience to his word because of what he's done for you. Not in order to get him to do it. But you know, no matter sometimes how many times you tell people, I'm not trying to earn my salvation, they don't believe you. I mean, they've been conditioned. Verse 19, then Yehudi from Antioch and Iconium came there. The Yehudi, these were the people of the land now. And having persuaded the multitude, they stoned Paul, dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. I would submit to you, none of us have been stoned to death yet for what we're trying to teach. Sometimes it may feel like it. But we haven't shed blood yet. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. And when they had preached the gospel, the good news, to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith. Remember, if you look up the word faith in Webster's, the first definition of the word faith is trust. You don't just have faith and just believe it because something said it. You trust what his word says. That's the anchor. Then you know exactly what it is you're following. You know what you're trusting in. They continued in the faith and saying, we must, through many tribulations, enter the kingdom of Yahweh. Through many tribulations. The gate is narrow. And few there are who find it. And I think all of us here have realized that the more we study and the more we realize, and the more narrow that gate becomes. Verse 23, so when they had appointed elders in every ecclesia or every group and prayed with fasting, they commended them to Yahweh in whom they had believed. And after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. Now when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of Yahweh for the work which they had completed. And when they had come and gathered the ecclesia together, they reported all that Yahweh had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, the nations. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. Remember, the house of Israel is scattered among all these Gentile nations. Salvation, deliverance has come to the Gentile nations in order to reach the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which are scattered among the Gentiles. That's why Paul said, boy, my ministry just got real big. Because he's going to have to reach all the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And when the Gentiles begin to accept the word and begin to crowd in, then Israel would be jealous and come. Got nothing to do with Judah. He already said, you know, when Judah turns to Messiah Yahushua, then the veil comes off and they can see him in the scriptures. But until Judah begins to look for Messiah, they're never going to see him. Chapter 15. And this is one that so many people use and misuse and everything else. Verse 1, and certain ones came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moshe, you cannot be saved. Or they're saying if you ain't circumcised, you ain't saved.
That's wrong.
Or delivered. But the question we all have to recognize, if we already know Torah, then we know that what's being reported here can't be true, because Abraham, it was considered righteousness for him when he believed Yahweh and did what he said do, and that was before he was circumcised. Why? So that he could become the father of the circumcised as well as the uncircumcised. So circumcision is not a requirement to be delivered. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. What question? Whether you had to be circumcised to be saved or not. So being sent on their way by the ecclesia, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the ecclesia and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all things that Yahweh had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command to keep the Torah of Moses. You see, they're trying to say that circumcision and keeping the Torah will get you saved. Not Messiah. What did Messiah say? No one comes to the Father but by me. You can do any kind of law or rule you want to, whether it's whatever. Verse 6, so the apostles and the elders came together to discuss this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Peter rose up and said to them, men and brethren, you know that a good while ago Yahweh chose among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. You know, if we go back, this is where he sent Peter down to Cornelius, you know, who was a Gentile, Roman. And it was through them that they heard the truth through the mouth of Peter. And that's what he's talking about. So Yahweh, who knows the heart, acknowledged them by giving them the Holy Spirit, the set-apart witness, just as he did to us, and made no distinction between us and them. One more sign. It just seemed like a long time. Okay. Verse 9 again, and made no distinction between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith, that is, by trust. Your purification comes by trusting Yahweh. If you trust him and believe what he said, then you do what he told you to do. If you don't trust and if you don't love, then you don't do what he said. It's simple as that. Verse 10, now therefore, why do you test Yahweh by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciple, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Is he saying that none of them could do the law? No, he's saying none of them could do the law for salvation. Nobody can. There was never a law that could make you saved. If there was a law that could get you saved, Messiah didn't need to die, did he? Can the law be changed? If the law can be changed, why didn't he change it so he wouldn't have to die? Can't be. Verse 11, but we believe that through the grace of Yahweh, Yehoshua the Mashiach, we shall be saved in the same manner as they. Everybody's saved the same way. Through the shed blood of Messiah. That's where your deliverance comes through. Then all the multitude kept silent and listened to Barnabas and Paul, declaring how many miracles and wonders Yahweh had worked through them among the Gentiles. And after they had become silent, James, Yaakov, answered, saying, men, brethren, listen to me. Now remember, James, Yaakov, the brother of Yehoshua, was kind of like the chief, you know, there in the temple in Jerusalem. Verse 14, it says, Simon has declared how Yahweh at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And with this the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written, after this I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David which is fallen down. Remember in Samuel we read about that tabernacle. He built a tent to bring the ark up into. And he said, I'm going to rebuild that which is fallen down. I mean, think about that. We get to think about David. We never really thought about maybe it was Yahweh wanted him to build a tent and he put the thing inside the tent. Not a temple. The tent. And then Peter said what? When I put off this tent. He used the same word to describe the body. And then we're told in many places our body has now become the temple or the tent of Yahweh to live in. If his word does not live in you, then he don't. I mean, does that make sense? After this I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins, and I will set it up so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh, even all the Gentiles and nations who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does all these things. Go to Amos chapter 9. In the book of Amos, in chapter 9, now when we read in the prophecy of Amos, okay, remember the name Amos means to carry or to lift up the burden, to carry the burden. We're supposed to help one another carry a burden, right? So Amos is derived from the Hebrew word amos, meaning to lift a burden or to carry. Therefore his name means a burden or even the burden bearer. So here in Amos in chapter 9, and remember this is a prophecy a long time ago. In verse 11, most Bibles have the phrase on that day. The actual Hebrew says, in the day that I will raise up the tabernacle of David which has fallen down, and repair its damages. I will raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom. Who is Edom? Esau. Who is Esau? The brother of Yaakov. Okay? We just got through reading and studying, before on Isaiah 11, that the two, we read it during the feast, and that he's going to come back and he's going to join the house of Judah with the house of Israel. Together they're going to fly down against the Palestinians, the Philistines, and then they're going to turn and they're going to come back and they're going to conquer what? Edom and Moab and all those others. Here is saying the same thing in Amos. But it has to do with the building up or the rebuilding of the tent of David. Verse 12, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles and nations who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does this thing. If we go back to where we were reading there in Acts, and he's quoting this passage from Amos, he's still talking about what the prophet said, and prophets uses, Yahweh, and this is talking about Yehoshua. They got to be one and the same. We read the scriptures where it says Yehoshua is going to come back and his feet are going to touch down on the Mount of Olives. If you read in Zechariah that Yahweh's going to come back and Yahweh's feet are going to touch down the Mount of Olives, well, Yahweh's a spirit, he ain't got no feet. Whose feet? It's got to be Yehoshua. Verse 18, had known to Yahweh from eternity are all his works. He said he knows everything. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Yahweh. Now remember, they were going out saying, you got to be what? You got to be circumcised and keep the commandments before you can be delivered. But we judge, I judge we should not trouble those from among the nations who are turning to Yahweh, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols. Got to stay away from idolatry. From sexual immorality. That means you can't go down there to them goddesses and all them temples down there and have sex with them so your crops will be prosperous. That's what them fertility goddesses were all about. That's what all that stuff was. You got to stay away from the sexual immorality. From things strangled. If something's strangled, it's got blood in it. You can't eat the flesh with the blood in it. And from blood. A lot of them people, would eat blood, drink blood, do all kinds of stuff, all kinds of pagan practices. Think about it right now. If you're trying to talk to somebody that's coming out of some type of pagan religion of some kind, where they had the sex, remember they got the religions, with the sex goddesses out of Egypt and all this stuff. They got religions where they drink blood. You can see them on there's a show somewhere called Taboo, and it goes through all these different things that these nations and lands and people have, the things they do. It's kind of like saying, look, if you're going to come in, these are the things that you've got to quit doing right now. Does this mean that that's all you got to do in your life? You got to quit drinking the blood. You got to quit having anything to do with idols. You got to quit, to strangle things, and no more of that sex stuff. Verse 21 is the explanatory note. For Moshe has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogue every Sabbath. All he's saying to them is, yeah, you don't have to tell them that they got to go get circumcised, or they got to do this, or they got to do that. You just tell them you got to quit doing these things, and then you're going to be going in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. These are Gentiles coming out of the nation. Then you're going to start going to synagogues, and what are you going to hear every Sabbath? The Torah being read every week. And as they learn the Torah, and the Torah becomes who they are, then the word of Yahweh will tell them what he wants them to do and how they want to live. You don't have to put rules and regulations on people. The word will change those people. Only the word of Yahweh will change people. We can't. Then it pleased the apostles and the elders. But notice he's not saying that these are only the 4 things that they have to do. He said, man, you got to quit doing these things because you're going to learn the rest of what you got to do when you go to synagogue and study the Torah. That's what he's saying. Really simple.
He didn't tell them they had to quit eating pork.
Huh?
Because that wasn't considered food.
No, he didn't tell them not to eat pork because it wasn't, you're right. It's not even listed as food. You learn that when you read Leviticus 11. You're not supposed to eat pork. You don't have to tell people you can or can't, but you tell them, when you come in here, you know, don't bring this, you know, don't bring no food, you know, we'll have food here, you can eat what's here. But after you go for a while, then you learn the things that you can do and what you can't do, right? But if you tell them don't do these things up front, then they're not embarrassed and you're not embarrassed trying to, you know, fix or correct or something. Then everybody can get along, right? And then what's going to dictate what you do or don't do? What the Word says, not somebody else. You don't have to go back and say, well, they won't let me. No, wait. Yahweh said, I can't. That's the difference. That way your life is being dictated to you by what His Word says. Verse 22, then it pleased the apostles and the elders with the whole ecclesia to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, Judas, who was also named Barsabbas, and Silas, leading men among the brethren. They wrote this letter by them. Now notice this is a letter they wrote that they carried with them when they go up there. The apostles, the elders, and the brethren, to the brethren who are of the Gentiles in Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that some who went out from us have troubled you with words, unsettling your souls, saying, you must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment. For one thing, they can't get circumcised and keep the law because they don't even know what it is. They don't even know what, you know, how are we going to do that? But he said, it seemed good to us, being assembled with one accord, or one purpose, or one mind, to send chosen men to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul. Men who have risked their lives for the name of our Master, Yehoshua the Mashiach. We have therefore sent Judas and Silas, who will also report the same things by word of mouth. They got out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. They got 4 of them going. This gives you 4 witnesses of what they did. And they got a written letter. For it seemed good to the set-apart breath, the Word, and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well. It doesn't say you're going to be delivered. You keep yourself from these, you'll do well, because they're going to be going in the synagogues and learning the rest of what Yahweh wants them to do. You see the difference? There's not just 4 things that the Gentiles got to do. Yahweh doesn't have different laws for different people. If He did, then He would be a respecter of persons, and the Scripture says He's no respecter of persons. So whoever does will receive. That's what it is. If you will, I will. If you don't, He don't. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do farewell. So when they were sent off, they came to Antioch, and when they had gathered the multitude together, they delivered the letter. When they had read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas, themselves being prophets also. What is a prophet? One who speaks the inspired word of Yahweh. A prophet can be anybody going out giving the word of Yahweh to somebody else. Right? Now Judas and Silas, themselves being prophets also, exhorted the brethren with many words and strengthened them. And after they had stayed for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. Paul and Barnabas also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of Yahweh with many others also. Since there was no other New Testament written yet, they were teaching the word of Yahweh. What were they teaching? Tanakh. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached or proclaimed the word of Yahweh, and see how they are doing." Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John, called Mark. We have the Gospel of Mark. But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Boy, they're getting a big argument here over who they're going to take. Paul didn't want that Mark guy. Barnabas did. Then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. You know, you read over that so quick and so fast, you never think about it. These two guys were mad. They were angry. They were getting so angry over this one called John Mark, they separated between the two of them themselves. We're never told that they were ever reconciled. We're never told exactly what it was that he did other than what it says here. We're never told that anybody asked for forgiveness, was forgiven, or anything else. But later on we read where Paul said what? "Bring Mark, for he is profitable for me." Somehow or other, the differences got repaired, but we're never told exactly how. Again in verse 39, then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another, and so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace or the favor of Yahweh. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening or exhorting the ecclesia, the called out ones. And that'll conclude the readings and the studies for this day. I thank you for your patience. And now I'll see if I can get all this stuff turned off.